Everyone's got their hands going. Just before we get into this, I want to say a big thanks to all the behind-the-scenes people. So you've seen Amy, Jack, and we also have a live captioner, Amanda. Thank you for your lovely hard work. And another fabulous panel. Hey, fabulous panelists. I would like you to perhaps introduce yourselves and maybe say whereabouts you are in this wonderful region of ours and which conferences / events that you have been involved with. So let's go, Hamish. I'll traffic direct. So, Hamish, go.
Right, kia ora. I'm Hamish Watson. I live in Christchurch, New Zealand, and it's an extremely sunny day here. Yeah, it's the best part of today is doing this for the end of the day. Some of the conferences that I've been involved with have been Ignite. That was early on in my speaking career, which was a really, really awesome experience, mostly because of the support I had from the community that were doing Ignite. I used to speak at PASS, which is a Professional Association of SQL Server. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, so I normally talk about databases and what have you. But I tend to submit to other conferences as well. Like I present at development conferences. I used to travel to Europe to speak at Techaramas over there, but these days I just do it from home.
We all remember those days, alas. What about yourself, Larene?
Hey, where do I start? So yes, I'm one of the graduates of the New Voices in Yao. Along with Sonia, we were in the same cohort, and I have to say it was just an amazing and life-changing program for, I guess, my speaking career. I don't really like to call it that. That's a bit weird. So I thought about kind of how I started speaking only when Amy kindly invited me to speak at today, and I think I actually technically started back at uni when I was tutoring, and I was up in front of every class kind of clicking through the slide deck showing how a for loop works to first year university students, and then I went on to teach kids programming after school and literally teaching programming, explaining to programming to 5-7-year-olds. But I started speaking at conferences kind of after I started speaking internally at my company ThoughtWorks at the time. I would give talks in there, and then I started speaking at smaller conferences, and I also speak a lot in MC meetups, so I'm one of the organisers for Women Who Code in Brisbane. That's great practice for speaking, recently been lucky to join the CFP committee a couple of times on conferences as well. So I'm excited to share kind of that side of things. When I first found out how speaker selection works and talk selection works, it kind of blew my mind as a speaker as well. So yeah, I mainly deliver talks on technical stuff. I try to stay as technical as possible, but I talk about accessibility most of the time.
That's it. I think we'll be able to give away some of the secrets from behind the curtain of CFP review. Lilly, what about you?
Yeah, hi. I have been speaking for a couple of years now at different conferences on a range of different topics, some of them technical, some of them adjacent to that. I used to be a historian, so a lot of what I enjoy speaking about is about connecting history with tech. And now I've been a historian, I then was a developer, now I'm a penetration tester and a security analyst, so I've had a bit of different experience across different parts of the industry. I've keynoted in a lot of different countries, including the US and the Czech Republic and Australia, and I've also helped run a lot of different conferences. Last year I helped to found and run the Technically Games conference, which was about technical game development talks. Before that, I spent 2018, 2019 helping run PyCon AU, and I was chair of the papers committee for that. Helped them to develop their talk selection process and document that, and it's all Creative Commons licensed, so other conferences can pick it up and run it if they want to. And I'm really excited to be here today. Nice.
That might be an interesting thing to add to the resources, I guess. Link link hounds as to what PyCon's looking for. So yeah, cool. Bronwen, last but not least. Oh, and Lily, I know you're in Melbourne because so am I. So yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, forgot to say that. I am.
Bronwen.
Hi. Yeah, I'm in Brisbane. So I do a lot more user group. I like the user group sort of scene, and I used to really enjoy combining that with traveling. And my trick was always to sort of do a user group presentation in a country I was going to and get the locals to give me some really good tips on like things to see that I wouldn't have like looked up on any of the websites. Conference-wise, Ignite and the previous incarnations of that. But then the one that I am co-organizer of is DDD Brisbane.
Excellent. So I'm just going to cut straight into the chase, like what does a good abstract actually look like? So what are you looking for when you see an abstract roll across your screen? Hamish, what do you think?
Yeah, cool. So I probably should have mentioned, so I used to do abstract reviews, which was really awesome. It actually made me a better abstract writer because I had a certain criteria that I looked at, but when the criteria was quite fluid because a lot of the conferences I was being a CFP reviewer for, it was global, right? So a lot of people writing their abstract, English was, second language for them. The thing I boiled it down to was, is the session actually going to be, would it interest me to go along? Is it enticing? Is it well thought out in terms of not the actual structure of what they wrote? Because one, as I mentioned, people who with English as a second language, the context of how they write is far different to me, right? And so I looked for a theme of where the topic that they're writing about has actually been researched, and that can show in what they're writing. On the flip side of that, I do appreciate, I'm a Kiwi. We like to, pretty much invent our own version of English. But we like to keep things simple, and I do recommend to people keep your sentences or your writing concise. You don't need big, long sentences to try and convince me to, that your abstract's good. What I'm looking for is actually some key things that, and it does depend, a 100 level session versus a 500. I actually didn't like looking at the 500 level because that meant I had to Google a lot of things that I didn't know much about.
So 500 level, for those of us that don't speak Microsoft, means?
My brain, everyone's brain is going to melt in the session.
So like advanced, an advanced talk.
Yeah, sorry, it's really advanced. Yeah, like basically the session should be in hexadecimal.
Cool.
But, the key points were, something that was slightly different, if I saw a lot of sessions just on, and I'll have to talk about databases because that's where I come from, performance tuning. And it was just like performance tuning 101. I would typically get about 2 or 3 sessions those where a session was like performance tuning of TempDB, the forgotten pillar of tuning. I immediately look at that, right? It jumps out at me.
Yeah. So catchy title, I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. That's good. A good start, anyway, right? Lily, what about you? What sort of things do you think make up an epic CFP submission?
I'm really interested in, well, firstly, whether the topic is something that the speaker seems passionate about, and it can really come through when you're writing about it, your passion, I think. And I'm not necessarily concerned about not as much about spelling and grammar, although those things are important. And if you're worried about yours, I'd really recommend getting a proofreader, because if your talk's selected, it will be proofread before it goes on the site. But also, yeah, whether people are excited and passionate about what they're talking about. And also whether people have thought about how the topic relates to the audience that the conference is for. Because I know that some people are keen to submit to a lot of different kinds of conferences, and I think that's a really good idea too, because if you put all that work into writing one talk, you want to make sure that, you know, you can deliver it more than once, hopefully. And even if it is recorded, people are more likely, I think, to watch you on live rather than, you know, online later as a recording. So it can definitely pay to submit to multiple places. But if you do that, make sure that you've tailored what you're writing to the audience for the conference. And you can get a good idea of this by looking at the conference website, by looking at what they put out on social media, by seeing, you know, previous recordings from other years. But yeah, it can be quite disappointing to sort of see a cookie cutter type thing where you think, oh, this person's put this in just because we have an open CFP. And if a conference is prominent, you can get that quite a lot, and it can be very frustrating. You're less likely, I think, to be selected if you're not tailoring what you've got to the people who are going to be there. And the other thing is, you know, whether it seems like you're selling something or not. Sometimes I think people can see CFP submissions as a free promo, and that isn't particularly for community-run events. That's not really what this is about. It's about the content. It's about the people who are going to be attending, not necessarily about you selling something. And that doesn't mean that you can't talk about a product or a cool thing that you developed. It means that you need to be really careful about the way that you phrase things so that the audience is getting something out of it beyond the concept that this product exists. Because what you really want is to give them ideas and inspire them to go and do something cool. And you can talk about your product, you just need to make sure that it's not a sales pitch, basically. Because when you're seeing quite a few, you get pretty good at sniffing out the ones that do look like sales pitches, and that can be, yeah, that can be a reason you may not get chosen. So be careful about how you frame those things.
Excellent. These are great tips. Bronwen, have you got any top tips of yours you'd like to add?
Yeah, so DDD Brisbane is a little bit different. So people submit a talk abstract and then it's voted on by the public. So instead of a panel of 4 or 5, you have hundreds of people voting on what talk they would like to come and see at the conference. So sometimes if the talks that tend to get highly rated or picked would be things that are quite catchy, or you know, the sort of news article headline that you just have to click on, or they can be quite polarizing, like something quite controversial that you might not normally put into a normal conference because you're trying to grab people's attention. But yes, I also definitely agree with Lilly on the look at the vibe of the conference and tailor it slightly. So if it's a bit more of a casual conference versus a little bit more formal, like you're presenting to like lots of CEOs or something like that, you might have to tailor the wording slightly differently.
Larene?
Yeah, agree with all of those points. When I read conference abstracts, I want to know pretty much straight away what I'm going to get. So especially if the language is clear. And I know, and I've done this in the past, where people try to kind of make themselves sound smarter because they think that's going to get them in. Studies actually show that plain language is preferred by even experts in a field. So please use plain language. And personality and passion are two things that I enjoy looking for, because abstract is kind of the talk is an extension of the abstract most of the time. So what you get in the abstract is kind of a little bit of a sneak preview of what you're getting in the talk. So passion and personality, if they come through, then that's a really, really good candidate. In terms of maybe like a template, I kind of tell people in terms of an abstract, catchy one-liner at the start, introduce the problem, a summary of what you're going to talk about, and then definitely say what people are going to take away from that conference so that they know exactly what they're going to get.
So the catchy title seems to be a bit of a theme. Just Larene, you just mentioned at the end again, catchy title. How do you come up with a catchy title? Where do you get your inspo? Loren, what do you reckon?
Me? Oh, back to me.
Yeah, I'm mixing
oh
up
gosh, puns.
Yeah, puns. Okay, yep.
Puns are usually a start. It depends how.
Part, folks. Puns.
Yeah, I guess I can talk a little bit about how I come up with titles. It does change depending on the conference, or even just depending on how I'm feeling that day. I'll either come up with it first, and so for example, at DDD. Which I really enjoyed speaking at. DDD is a wonderful conference. I'm from Brisbane, by the way, I forgot to mention as well. I actually came up with the title first because I went, DDD, how do I come up with something that uses the letters DDD? So I came up with data-driven diversity. And then I wrote the talk in abstract after that and then decided to submit it. So I kind of balance going between writing the abstract first and working out what I'm going to say, and maybe there's something in the talk that's catchy that will intrigue people, and I put that into the title, or I write the title first. There's no real formula for this. I'm a bit of a pun person, so I like putting puns in if I can, but it depends on the conference as well. Someone mentioned before, more serious, and maybe a bit more serious of a title, and if it's more fun and casual, then I'll go I'll just go all out.
Yep. Bronwen, what do you think?
Yeah, I usually start, play on words. I usually start with what I want to talk about and try and think about what it would be in like half of a tweet, and see if I can come up with as few words as possible to summarize it. I guess that would be my tip.
Oh, half a tweet. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Lily?
I like things that have alliteration in them, where everything starts with the same letter or starts with the same sound. I think those can be quite catchy. And also things that have assonance, words that have got similar sounds in them. So rhyme can be one, but also words that are playing around the same kinds of sounds internally can be really good. I have a list of titles that I see quite often that I think should probably be avoided, but generally they fall into the category of snow clones and cliches. I think that we get a lot of titles that are kind of cliche ones, like, X for fun and profit, or X, Y, and Z, oh my, or to X or not to X. And those things can be really tempting, I think, to try and pick for a title, but a lot of people do that. And if you want it to stand out a bit more, pull out your thesaurus, have a bit of fun with it, and see what else you can come up with that's a bit more catchy, that sounds like it could be, the title of an album or something like that, because I think that those are far more interesting to me.
Nice. Hamish? Wait. Wait.
Yeah. Thank you so much. 2021, it's only just better than 2020, right? In terms of,
it's one more. It's like 11. It's one louder.
What I used to do, because I was on both sides, right? I would want to write an abstract that would be catchy and what have you. And it's like career advice. I can give you the best career advice, and it's not based on anything I've ever done personally. My career path has been shocking. I don't even know what it is. With abstracts, same deal. If you wrote an abstract and you send it to me, I'd be like, Michelle, you need to do this. This would be brilliant. So I do that. I send it to a number of people all around the world, and I have a particular friend in Canada who is just wonderful. They, send me a back and they're like, you should try this. And I will often write two versions of my abstract, and sometimes 3 different titles, because it's the title that's going to get you. And so for me, it's actually a bit of community collaboration, and part of that is, it goes 2 ways. I help people with their abstracts, and I've got some really great friends who help me with mine, because often you're in the moment and you're right here and you're like, I've got to have this, this, and this. And having someone who gives you really great constructive feedback is brilliant. And you know what, Michelle? Today was a classic example.
Is that right? How so?
Yeah. What's 500 level? And this is you know, for me, I'm like, oh yeah, 100, 500. For me, that's just something I think about all day, every day. And that's something that I do want people to think about in their abstract. And I kind of do it in corporate world, or, you know, and when I'm working with people. Explain abbreviations. I hate 3-letter acronyms, right? Because they're the most uninclusive thing ever. Because I'm sitting in a meeting, someone says a 3-letter acronym, I don't actually know what it means, but I don't want to actually raise my hand and say, sorry, I don't know what, you know, insert 3-letter acronym here is. And
whereas I will always be game to ask the dumb questions. 500.
I am now. So yeah. I know it, but I will actually say, sorry, I'm gonna ask a really silly question, and it's not a silly question. What is it? And now I'm the champion of that. And I think that when we come to our abstracts, don't get too focused on the, you know, the abbreviations like SSMS and this, that, right? Explain it.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the plain language thing, I think, as well, that Larene was talking about. I guess my top tip for the title thing is, if you hear something that you think sounds catchy, Google it and find out where you got it from. Because I did a talk once and I used the theme of like winning hearts and minds, and then somebody kind of sent me a message and said, do you know where that's from? It's like a really horrible thing from the Vietnam War. And I looked at it up and I was like, oh no. And it was kind of too late. I'd put it in. So yeah, learn from my mistakes. Google where you got this cool title from and make sure it's not something really horrible. Yeah. So I guess we talked about we need a good talk title and things that you look for in an abstract. But maybe is there something that you can say, whatever you do not do this thing. Sometimes it's easy to have a counter example. You know, as you're sifting through your abstracts and you see something that makes you just go, next. What can you think of some examples of that, maybe, Lilly, that you've seen that would just cause you to carry on?
Yeah. I mean, apart from the things I've noted already, you know, not necessarily that, say, a cliche title is going to make me throw away the whole talk, because I'd want to look further than that. But definitely things that look like sales pitches more than anything else are going to be kind of tricky. And anything that leads with a or contains a comparison or a mention of something that's really exclusionary. You know, there are a lot of people who will use examples like, oh, you know, even your grandmother could understand this kind of thing. And those kinds of things can be particularly gendered comparisons. Some people's grandmothers helped write code that made things go into space, you know? So have a think about what you're doing. Have a look at the code of conduct as well, and think about the kinds of language that you're using. It can be really interesting to see just the kinds of things that bubble up in your mind that you may not even realize can be tricky. It also doesn't mean that I'm going to pass on something, but it does mean that particularly the conferences I'm involved in, we want to give some one-on-one time with a lot of the people who submit and give them a chance to make the best submission possible, which can take a lot of time, but we try. So we'll usually write back and say, oh, hey, were you aware that this is something you may want to change? So that they can give it another go, perhaps, if they want to, rather than try and throw away the whole thing. But that can definitely make me pause or wonder what the rest of the talk's going to be like if they're putting those kinds of examples in the abstract itself. That's really your showcase, so your preview. I think it was Larene who said it's a bit like a taster of what's going to come. So that would really be one of the flags for me, I think.
Nice. What about you, Bronwen? Top do not do this tip.
Yeah, so similar, CFP, like lots of swearing, anything to do with like beating up your boss, anything to do with violence. We would like ask them to resubmit and maybe rephrase the wording, and sales pitches and anything that looks like you don't care about the audience. Like, I've just learned this thing and I've come unprepared. Like, I've come to rant is like, I've seen those titles, and we would usually ask them to like refine it.
Hamish, your top do not do tip.
Wow, Bronwen, you actually almost made me lost for words, which is quite rare. I luckily I've never seen something like that. I think in fact, what I just did now, you know, I did a bit of humor, and I would say, please don't put sarcasm in your abstract, because delivering sarcasm, you actually need to read the face to see if it's sarcastic or not. But I think, you know, humor, metaphors, sarcasm, leave that for the delivery side. You know, if you're writing that in the abstract, it's gonna actually, at best, I'm gonna be confused. At worst, I'm gonna be offended. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't try that. You know, stick to some brilliance around, you know, the topic, the technology, and what have you that you're doing. Yeah. Yep,
Larene.
Yeah, I just want to say, Bronwen, I love that you give people another chance. I think that's a really, really nice thing to do. And yeah, on the sarcasm thing that Hamish just mentioned, thinking especially international conferences, there's a lot of things to consider in terms of inclusion and cross-cultural considerations as well in the language that you're using. So I think it's always better to be safe than sorry. So if you're going to use something with a little bit of flavor, maybe Google it and have a think about how that might come off to someone from a different culture. And one that I've seen is too many in-jokes and too many memes that are around a specific generation that doesn't cater to a large audience. If there's too many in the abstract, there's going to be heaps in the talk. Which might not be appropriate for maybe the conference that you're going for. It might be for others. And something that I've seen a little bit of, and not too much luckily, is arrogance. And that is a straight away no, because I think that, like, we're all here to learn and there's a whole lot we don't know. So if you kind of come in with your abstract going, I know everything about this, that's kind of probably not true, firstly, and it's not very humble. We want to make it inclusive for everyone, so we don't want people to feel stupid during your talk. So we don't want to really take that risk. Yeah, that's probably all I have to add.
Yeah, there's a definite kind of exclusionary theme as well that I'm hearing, which is interesting. One thing I forgot to say, dear audience, is, of course, you can ask questions in the chat, and please do, because do not let your burning question go unanswered. I will attempt to keep an eye on it, and Amy will also keep an eye on it. So, yeah, fire away as we talk amongst ourselves here. So I guess we talked a little bit about the magic that happens behind the curtain, and I think Bronwen, you mentioned that maybe DDD is a bit different in how the talks actually get picked. So maybe some info on what actually happens. I sent my thing in. What are you people doing with my abstract when I send it in? Why does it take so long? Where's my acceptance? How does it actually work in your conferences that you work with? Bronwen, do you want to go first? You talked a little bit about DDD.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
So this is specifically to DDD Brisbane, because each of the DDDs are a little bit different. So for ours, we put out a CFP. You fill it out kindly, and we get the list together, and then we do a quick pass, read through, make sure there's nothing that we wouldn't want to put up on the internet, and give those people, as I mentioned, a chance to edit them. And if they don't want to do that, we may remove some. Then all the rest go up for voting. We've changed it a couple of times during the year. We have gone with first initial, last name. So if you're picking between your friend and someone you don't know, you will vote for your friend, and that we decided was fine because you're paying. So then people can vote. There's usually around 200-ish talks submitted, and then people get to vote, pick 8 that they want to see. Then we pretty much take the top ones, and if we get a speaker that happens to get in twice, we will then let them choose which talk they want, and then give the next person down the list the option to talk. And that's for their main talks, and then we invite a keynote and a lock note speaker separately.
Hamish, what about for your conferences that you've been involved in?
So I do local community events, and so that they're pretty cool. It's generally myself and a couple of people, but I did. I was a reviewer. I was also a team lead, and then I was on the board of directors for PAS, Professional Association SQL Server. And it was an interesting experience in terms of, you know, I would review 200 odd abstracts as a reviewer. I would feed it up the team lead. And then, of course, I became team lead and would have all these things fed up to me because, you know, out of 200, we're possibly going to put 50 forward in a particular area. And then as a director on the board, there were a couple of times where we actually would discuss with the education committee, because it went up there, and we'd actually say, well, actually, you know, there's this particular session that fits with the direction we want to go in, and sometimes that wouldn't flow down to the reviewers. And so that was almost borderline corporate, you know, like it was far different to how I do it with my community event. I run, you know, SQL Saturday, and for me it was like I had a range of topics, and one of the cool things about the event here in Christchurch, which we attracted people from Sri Lanka, India, Singapore, North America, the UK, Australia, everywhere, because my event was built around community. And if you had a topic, you knew that if you submitted it to my committee, that we would look at the merits of what you're presenting. And if your abstract was not well written in English, I'd just drop you an email and say, can we have a quick talk? Your topic's brilliant, but I think in terms of getting people along to the session, can we do that, you know? And I think that's kind of key to running community events like the one that I used to run here in Christchurch. There are some wonderful, passionate people out there, and we definitely have to include them and help them along, because I got wonderful topics to talk about, and I don't want the hurdle of an abstract. I want, you know, them to come and present.
Nice. It seems like a lot of the community conferences are pretty good about feedback and help, which is good to see.
Yep.
Larene?
On the other hand, the larger conferences that are, I guess, kind of the more corporate ones. Is corporate the right word, Michelle? I don't.
You're telling the story.
The ones that cost a little bit more money and you get your company to pay you to go to. A lot of people submit to. A lot of people to submit to, and unfortunately, most of the time you don't get a whole lot of feedback. It depends on the conference, of course, but most that I've seen don't give feedback. It might be changing though. And so the ones that I've done have been, we were kind of separate from the agenda committee. So the people who kind of put the order and stuff, we were just representatives from the community that went, you know what talks do you want to see, and put down why, but also try and balance the diversity as well. So luckily this particular conference went out and tapped on shoulders and got a really great diversity of speakers to submit. They did a lot of work making sure that the submissions were diverse in the first place. And then we created a lot of work for us because there were a lot of submissions. And then we went through and read every title, every abstract. This one was not anonymized. So we kind of thought about balancing the number of tickets sold. We're trying to optimize the number of tickets sold. And the speaker experience, we want the speakers to have a really good time together. Usually speakers fan over other speakers at the same conference. I know I have anyway. Attendee experience, we want to cater to the widest audience, as well as conference branding, like what do what does the conference want to be known for in terms of like the speakers they invited and the general conference feel, and the speaker selection is a big part of that. I don't know if I've digressed now, but that's kind of the things in my head anyway while I was on particular CFP committees. So you read through the talk, you read through the you read through the title, you read through the abstract, you have a look at their speaking experience, and then you write a few lines of feedback, and then we kind of threw it over the fence to the agenda committee. So that's my most recent experience.
So yeah, again, different again. Lily?
Yeah, I've got a thing to talk about that's different again. With the PyCon AU committee, the process that we have tended toward in the last couple of years has been heavily focused on being anonymized. We get a very large number of submissions every year, and there are a lot of very big names in the community that end up submitting a lot. So we want to make sure that the talks that are getting into the program aren't just getting into the program because, oh, well, we know such and such who did this thing and we think they'll be good. So I've absolutely seen submissions where it's like, oh, it's me, I'll think of something, but I'm good. So that's not the kind of thing that we want. We want to make sure that people are, coming up with something and thinking about it before they submit. We also want to give people a chance. So we need a couple of data points. The first phase that we go through, we get submissions from as many people as possible. That includes people who are waiting for the submission to open and will submit, and people who we approach to submit because we think that they would have really good things to say. And while all the submissions are coming in, there are people who are reviewing them and removing things like if people have put their names in there or if people have put pronouns in there, because we don't want the reviewers to know who's written the thing. So whoever reviews the initial ones, is excluded from reviewing afterwards because they will have an idea of who the submitter is. Once the submission process is closed, then we open it up to the reviewers. We have about 15 of them go through, make comments on how they want the talk to be, rank it, that kind of thing. That's all sort of private and kept internal. And when they're done with that, that piece of data will go into the talk selection meeting, which we call the Thunderdome, where we'll sit down and we'll talk about absolutely all of them. Sort of see how they were ranked. That's where we de-anonymize, we put the names to it. So, we want to make sure that we have, then we have a sense of, firstly, how our people feel about the talk. Secondly, who the talk is by. And then between those data points, we're able to make a selection of what we want to go into the program at the end of the day. And, try and make sure that we have a good representation of the community as a whole, that there are beginners, that there are very experienced people in there, but also that people know that they've been selected not because of who they are, but because of the proposal that they've written. And we're also not choosing people based on, oh, well, we need more women to speak, so we're just going to get some women in to speak, even though their proposal isn't strong enough, which is a fear I've had submitting myself. Like, was I chosen just because I was a woman? It's hard for me to tell. So I find anonymized processes to be much better, I think, because it means that if you know that that's the case, then you're chosen because the people want you to be there to talk about that thing, and they're not there trying to fill some kind of diversity quota or whatever.
Yeah, and I think we had some speakers mention that earlier as well. I guess my takeaway from this last part is there's so many different conferences and so many different ways that they all do CFP, which is all the more reason not to be discouraged if you chuck your submission into a conference and it gets rejected. Heck, try it at a whole bunch of other conferences because everybody does something a little bit differently, and you never know your luck. And I guess the feedback would be great too. So I guess on that, we have time for probably one last question. So what advice would you give if you're going to submit the same proposal to multiple events? And I think Lily, you touched on this a little bit earlier. Just copy and paste it, or like how would you, what would your advice be? I'll just chuck it back to Lily because I know you talked a little bit about this before.
Sure. Yeah. Firstly, what I said earlier is still true. I think that it's very normal for people to submit to multiple events in different places, and definitely that is not a thing that's wrong or forbidden. Do it. It's great. Make sure that you're looking at the event, the type of event that it is, the type of audience that they're expecting to have, and tailor what you're saying to that audience. You know, if you have a introduction to security talk, maybe the security conference isn't the place you want to submit that to, or maybe you want to frame it so that you're talking about how to give security people information about how to talk to security to beginners, for example. Whereas, you know, at a developer conference, perhaps there are different places where that would be more appropriate if you're not talking to a group full of security experts. But yeah, thinking about where you're submitting it to and how you can change it to make it fit the audience is really important.
Larene, have you got anything to add on that, or last tips for our audience?
On the multiple conferences, I don't usually submit to multiple at the same time, but I do submit the same talk-ish again and again. But I usually rewrite the whole talk and abstract and title again, even though it's pretty similar in content. And so I've got the conference open, and I've looked at past conference speaker lineups and their abstracts and stuff, and kind of gotten into the mood, I think someone mentioned earlier, and then written the abstract again from scratch. Yeah, that's kind of my method. It's not the only way. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Cool.
Yeah.
Bronwen?
Know what conference you're presenting at, I guess, is my top tip, and to know the vibe of the audience, because if you get that wrong, things can go badly. And if you're submitting the same talk, the abstract can be same, but yeah, the content can obviously be completely different. If you're going to present at a university, you're targeting students in different age groups versus a corporate event. But yeah, know your audience, I think, would be the top tip.
Awesome. If you wonder why I'm laughing, drilling has started somewhere in my house. And if everybody's suddenly getting a dentist vibe, I'm really sorry. Hamish, what are your thoughts on multiple submissions?
So over the course of years, months, whatever, my session might actually morph a little, or actually get better. What I do though is, and I guess this is, again, a regional thing, I make sure that I swap my S's for Z's when I, submit to North America. And it is an absolute bugbear for me. But I'm actually worried that they are going to look, some reviewer somewhere is going to look at my abstract and go, you don't know how to spell. I do know how to spell here in Christchurch, New Zealand, just. Do you know what I mean? And, but conversely, for some of my sessions, I'll actually, if I am presenting to, say, a database crowd, I love talking about DevOps, and I've finally said the word DevOps in this session. I have to, by the way, every single time I talk, I have to mention the word DevOps because I live and breathe it. So for database people, I will say, hey, let's bring, DevOps to the database and just make everything go brilliantly. For a development crowd, it'll be, how do we fold that troublesome database into our application pipeline, application release pipeline? That DevOps is doing some wonderful things in our application layer, but the database might be a hurdle. It's the same talk, but all I've done is change some of the language, My first ever session that I did was killing fear ops with a culture of DevOps. Luckily it worked, but it was a massive negative. Having the word killing in your title, turning fear ops into DevOps. Just one word change, took the whole meaning around. So always, approach your sessions as a form of continuous improvement. I look back at some of the sessions I did way back when, and funnily enough, the theme that I'm talking about now is the same, but I've managed to apply just a little bit more thought and consideration to both the title and the abstract.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so my side tip is, apparently if you're applying to any of Hamish's conferences, the word DevOps is your secret key to accessing solution. Fantastic. I think we are pretty much out of time. I know there was another question, which I'm sorry we did not get to, but hopefully our wonderful panel will be around for a few more minutes and maybe can answer in the chat. And I would like to thank you all so much for sharing your advice and wisdom. And I'm a bit sad that I wasn't scribbling down notes, because I think there are a lot of really good takeaways and really good information. So everybody, virtual round of applause for our wonderful panelists. And I hope Amy's ready to come and swoop us all out of this stream yard that we are all playing in.
But thank you, Michelle. You're actually one of the best chair people that I've had for this. You've been really engaging, and it's been awesome, and you've made it easy.
Thank you. I give good audience. You know, that's the other, tip for speakers. If you want to be a better speaker, also be a good audience, and that's how we can all help support each other. Very